So the second principle of Sri Aurobindo's three principles of education. The second principle is that the mind has to be consulted in its own growth. The idea of hammering the child into the shape desired by the parent or teacher is a barbarous and ignorant superstition. And just as a side note, I'm going to read this with male pronouns, but I'm sure if Sri Aurobindo were here today, he would have inclusive pronouns. It is he himself who must be induced to expand in accordance with his own nature. There can be no greater error than for the parent to arrange beforehand that his son or daughter shall develop particular qualities, capacities, ideas, virtues, or be prepared for a prearranged career. To force the nature to abandon its own dharma is to do it permanent harm, mutilate its growth, and deface its perfection. It is a selfish tyranny over a human soul and a wound to the nation, which loses the benefit of the best that a man or a woman could have given it and is forced to accept instead something imperfect and artificial, second-rate, perfunctory, and common. Every man and woman has in him something divine, something his or her own, a chance of strength and perfection in however small a sphere, which God offers him or her to take or refuse. The task is to find it, develop it, use it. The chief aim of education should be to help the growing soul to draw out that in itself which is best and make it perfect for a noble use.
Perfect.
Muted, actually.
Thank you, David. Would you like to share your experience in this work and what are your views?
Well, I really appreciate the actual words, the intensity and the focus of Sri Aurobindo's words. I haven't read it for a while, and to come back to it, there's a fierceness to his assertions that I believe is absolutely correct from the little that I know. And I'm just reminded of the invitation to parents and teachers to really respect that fierceness. I'm just struck by the intensity of his language, and I feel really appreciative of it right now. That this is not a wishy-washy, some of this, some of that. We can find a happy middle issue. That what is really required of us is this courageous respect for the soul, and as it's expressed in each individual, and particularly in our young, in children and youth.
I second that. The thing that in this Western culture we are not good at is being patient enough to let that all happen. That we want right now to make a decision to chart a path and get on with it, rather than saying, I wonder what is here. So, I was also struck by the language, especially the barbarous part. For those of us who had traffic with young people, we know how much damage that does. And it's pretty long lasting.
I was thinking back to two things. The barbarous part. I'm one of those terrible people who remembers insults from my entire life, and going to a preschool, and they asked if I wanted a cot, and I heard, do I want to cut? And I didn't want to be cut. And I reacted very badly to this small miscommunication. And it was so traumatic being in a new place and being left by my mother. And, here I am, 60 years plus remembering this, and all of the insults that and not intended that are inflicted on children. And the other thing that I clicked on was when I was teaching in Connecticut at the Early Learning Center. One of the things we had to do was we were teaching 2 to 6-year-olds was to sit down on the floor with them and have eye contact and be at eye level and practice using I-you statements instead of let's do this, let's do that. And this very individualized interaction was so powerful. And one of my favorite anecdotes, because we videotape these interactions, the lessons, was to be able to see that when someone was teaching and on the floor and concentrated with the other child, that the child nearby who was playing with blocks and didn't seem to be at all connected with what was going on, exactly at the key moment of the teaching moment, whether it was the silent E, the kind of dramatic climax, this child who is in the background turns and looks, and you feel like this kind of grok, you know, this click click, where they got the whole thing. They weren't part of the lesson, but they were absolutely. So I just think of that, the stuff that's not intended, and then the times when something happens that we're not even aware of. But if we're kind of focused on this task of respecting the child and treating him as a soul, as someone who's you know coming from the Indian tradition, you can say, you know, this may have been my teacher in a previous life. You don't know who's in that particular body, and it gives a nice context somehow.
I don't think you're the only person who doesn't forget insults, whether they're intended or not. When I was 12, which was in 1958, long ago when dinosaurs roamed the earth, I was in the 6th grade, and I had the most popular teacher in the school. He was a tall guy, very charismatic. Everybody wanted to be in his class. And he took me aside one day at recess, and in the kindest way possible, intending to be helpful, he said, you know, Andrea, I just had heard from the kids, some of the kids, that they think you're kind of bossy. I'm the oldest child of 5. You bet. I was never taught to think, oh, I should do what everybody else does. I can remember, that was 62 years ago. I can remember that. And I thought, he didn't want to traumatize me, but it changed how I was going to behave for 10 years. And it took another while to get over that. So you don't know what kind of impact you have. Now that gets balanced out with a kid coming back after I haven't seen him for 10 years and saying, oh, your class changed my life. Well, good. But when you read about trauma, you really have to understand that your courageous respect, which is a great phrase, David, is absolutely has to be at the heart of it, because you don't know who you're talking to at all. Not at all, but sometimes.
And I think that courageous respect will help children develop their own confidence and trust in that also. Thank you, Andrea. Mira, I would like to share you. Oh, you have to unmute yourself.
I just wrote down some points that the teachers can think about when they're in the classroom. And so one of the things is to instill, like, help them to see their potential in themselves, and also move from like content-based to development-based. And Shabida talks about the human mind and developing the different the different aspects of human mind. And also, like, whenever the children face difficulties, the teacher has to be like a friend and to help them find their own solution for the difficulty and let them make choices of what they want to do. And the teacher can help them find out, who am I and what do I want to do in life? It's by careful observations, and it's by careful observations from the parents and the teachers and guiding them along those lines. I think that'll help the children to decide what they want to do, or where they want to go. And also making them lifelong learners and instilling the love of learning in them. And also like a society based on helping them to see the society based on helping them to reward every job, and not just, and so that the needs of the family are met. And so that's what I just wrote down some points, and I just thought, that's something that the teachers can think about. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's not only the teachers, but I think it applies to parents too. Thank you. Martha?
Yeah, I appreciate very much the comments that have been spoken already. And I think what Sri Aurobindo points out here very much indicates the need for sensitivity to the nature of the child. And so a calling to be a teacher should include that kind of attunement, the ability to be attuned to the nature of a variety of personalities and types. Certainly that sensitivity involves a great deal of subtle perception. Reflecting on early childhood insults, I had a brother who was very tone deaf, and he loved to sing. He loved to sing. And he was asked by one of the teachers to just mouth the words, not to vocalize. And I think this had a profound effect on him, because he's been very self-conscious ever since, and even developed a stutter at one point. And I think it had a very profound effect on him. One of the problems too in society, with families and expecting children to follow a particular path, that I've encountered in some people whom I knew growing up, was the expectation to go into a family business. And I think this is a mixed blessing, because children can feel, well, I have a job, I've got some place to work and earn my living. But then if this is not the nature of a child to be a business person, it's quite a burden. I had several acquaintances growing up who were expected to go into family businesses. And one was the father of a neighbor. And this led to severe depression on his part, and eventually to suicide. It was just such an unfortunate mismatch. So if we can find ways to give young people especially, and people at any stage of life, to do what is attuned, what they are truly attuned to in their own nature. This gentleman who had to go into this one particular business, he wanted to be an artist, and he continued to try to express himself in art in his off time, and he would make sculptures for the local town's parade floats and things like that. And I remember seeing paintings in the basement of his home that he had done. But this was something that his family didn't appreciate and respect. So at any stage of life, we need to honor that. And of course, it's a very difficult thing to know really, in a way, to know one's own inner being. That's always a challenge, and it's what we aspire to do in yoga, to discover that and be true to that. So at any stage, we need to develop our attunement and sensitivity to all these issues of development and growth. And especially when we're young and in the formative years, this matters more than any other time. But it takes time to discover oneself. And I think that's where, in general, most educational systems really fail the individual, because we don't allow for time.
But the other point that I perceive is also not expressed directly, but you can see this, well, you can see this already in the first principle. He hinted at that. The own growth is also a temporal growth, how fast we grow. And I think this is an experience of every teacher, that in the same grade, in the same class, you have children who have the same age, but like it or not, in some, or at least in some subjects, in some topics, there are some who are more advanced, who are more skilled, who are a bit beyond the program, others who are a bit more late. And this is not only in the single children, but you can see it that it varies according to the, how do you say, subject. For example, I might be quite well advanced in arts and have difficulties in math or sciences and so on. And this is something that our educational system does not look for. We have this system of grades. At that age, you have to learn that. At that age, you have to learn the other thing. I know that many might not agree with this, but I think it's sooner or later we will have also to question this precise ordering of at which age we have to learn what. This one-to-one correspondence between a program and the age at which you learn this or that. Because for some children it's okay, for some children it is too early, and for some other children, it's all at the same age, it is too late. So that's what I see also in this, that the mind has to be consulted in its own growth. And I can see this also in my personal experience. I more or less, still today, I'm very slow in learning. Quite slow, also compared to other adults and so on. But when I learn something, sometimes, not in all things, there are things that I never really learned, but but there are things which I learned very slowly. But once I have learned it, I have been able to develop skills beyond the average. So one begins slowly, but then spikes, so to speak. There are others who spike immediately, and then there's sort of limit in their learning. And everyone is different in this sense. And whereas our school system tries to flatten everyone to every age, and they have to learn at that time that thing. This is also something that goes against the second principle, and I think should be questioned.
I'm really taken with your sense of how the lockstep progression hinders people. My daughter was young for her age group for going to school. And in the fall, she would be introduced to a new math principal, and she cried and she cried and she rang, I can't do it, don't get it. By April, her brain had grown up, she got it. But for the rest of her life, she has thought, I'm not good at math, because she got it at the wrong time. So I absolutely agree with you, Marco. I think you're right on. I was thinking about something else. Another thing that is part of that passage is that we are to help the student identify, find, or grasp his or her innate dispositions, interests, and abilities, which is, I think, pretty much the best definition of a teacher I've ever heard. So my question, because as you have been in the classroom, is, well, how do you do that? And we had a tool in the high school at MICDS. You'll remember this, Lakshmi, for sure. It's not a tool that will solve every problem, but the Myers-Briggs personality or disposition identifier was an incredibly powerful way to explain to a kid, his parents, and sometimes the teachers, why certain teaching strategies just were not going to work. And what has to happen with a kid who sees things globally, likes to have patterns and themes, and a person who wants to have things one thing at a time. Between a person who is perfectly flexible. Oh, you want to go to the movies? Sure. Oh, you change your mind? Fine. Or a person who wants to plan something out 6 months in advance and can't stand to have any deviation from that. Those things were revolutionary to kids because they never thought of themselves as being able to identify a pattern within themselves. So as a tool, as long as we don't overdo it and make sure that that explains everything, is a way of getting to know yourself when you are at the next intellectual level beyond that sort of young child in the natural world point. So I just offer that as a way to think about how we go about helping people see how to help their children identify their particular innate natures, what their dispositions are. Because disposition really, I think, means a lot. Oh, and I want to say one other thing about, Julian, what you were saying. I think your comments also adhere strongly to what we finally recognize as sexual disposition and gender disposition within our culture. We finally acknowledge that a young person can know him or herself so well they know they're in the wrong body or they've been assigned the wrong gender identity within the culture. So maybe we're making progress. It's my hope. I'm done.
Thanks, Andrea. And I think from societal expectations and also parents, teachers' expectations, maybe the fear of not able to make a living or earn money, maybe that fear kind of unintentionally, harm the development. Thank you. Chaitu, would you like to share? Oh, you're muted, Chaitu.
Sorry. I was saying that that was exactly the point that I wanted to talk about, the societal expectation. So what comes out to me, I mean, one of the points that strikes out from the second principle is that we've created a society where I think there are such expectations that it makes it very difficult for parents and teachers. One thing that very early on that struck me was this hammering, that goes on. Like if you look at it in the Indian culture or system, very often the parents predetermine whether the child would be a doctor or an engineer. It's almost like that. So every family, it'll always be either engineers or doctors most of the time. I remember I was really fortunate that I didn't have that kind of a pressure from my parents, and I grew up in a completely different environment, having studied in the ashram school. But when I went further to do my master's in the university, so the entire class, like 80% of them were engineers, and the remaining were either they had done some they graduated in commerce or computer science or something. So whenever I would ask somebody, why did you choose to be an engineer? I couldn't help myself but ask. Most of them would be like, it's almost like they didn't even think about it. They would say, but that's what we do usually. It's either an engineer or a doctor. And I was quite surprised that they would not have something other than that they would be interested. It's just that because the society is like that, it's, as Marco was saying, we have a graded system. it's all predetermined. Everything is like decided that when you're in kindergarten, this is what you learn. And when you're in this level, you learn this much. And when you graduate, you be an engineer or a doctor, and then you do an MBA or something, so that your life is set in the sense that you can earn money and that way you're secure. So there's a lot of, I think, peer pressure, and even amongst the parents, there is pressure. There's a lot of comparison that happens. So very early on, the hammering comes where, you know, they want their children to grow in a certain way, which they think they're actually helping them, because probably in their mind it is that they're making life simple by giving them the easy path. Whereas if you become an artist or a dancer or anything other than that, might be more difficult in terms of settling in life the way the world sees it. So in fact, I had a experience as a parent very early on. When my son was 2, he had a play date with one of his friends, and one of the mom had asked me, the child's mom, so has he started reading alphabets? Does he make words with 3-letter words? I was very surprised, because he's just 2 years old or 2 plus, and I said no, not at all. I just let him play at the stage. So then I was curious, and I asked this, what about your son? Does he already learn? Yeah, he understands some, but he doesn't listen to me. I try hard if he can get it, you know. So I didn't comment anything on that, but I realized that's how it is in most cases, you know. That's the environment that you grow in, and you just pass that on. So one thing that we lack is we forget to give choices to kids. I think in the Western culture, it's a little better in a way. I think you give more choices, at least in the way we teach them. That's what has been my experience. Observation is completely lacking. I think we do not give time. That's been my experience also from what I see and learn. And I like what Meera said about lifelong learners. I think that's something that we all forget to teach our kids. It's really not important that they become a certain thing, whatever it is, or learn alphabets or do great science and math. But teach them to learn for themselves is something that we all miss as teachers and parents. I've had, even studying in the ashram, I've had very few good teachers whom I felt actually taught me to learn by myself. They taught me to take the interest, and they didn't give me answers, or they didn't direct me to do it in a certain way. They actually made me think and made me learn by myself. I think that always helps the child to question, and it's not just the child, the adult, or at any stage, you know, that's when the learning happens, true learning happens. And the best, like Sri Aurobindo says clearly, that everybody has something divine in them to discover. And I think that awareness and consciousness, conscious thinking develops only first if you start questioning and learning that way, where you can, from the basic things, if you can not just go by what people say, but actually try to think for yourself, you know, then slowly, maybe it helps you to go inward and question the deeper questions and discover for yourself what is that divine thing that is there in you. That's my little.
Back on the developmental stages, and well, not stages, but I'm sorry, sensitivity to children. In this present time, parents are spending so much time with their children, sometimes with great frustration and annoyance as a result, because people are trying to work from home too. But I think one advantage of that is that it does give parents an opportunity to be more aware of, especially if they're willing to be sensitive to the personalities of their children. And perhaps this will result in it was certainly going to result in some changes in education, but perhaps also too in giving children more time to reveal their inner nature and who they really are.
Yeah, I connect well with what you are saying now, Marta, also with what Andrea said. This idea, on one side, giving children more time and trust your kids, your children. And this is something that we still, I think, in our culture has still not been elaborated, digested properly, because we are in a society which has all, and more than ever, I would say today, this pressure of time, of being efficient, of get a job as soon as possible, as being at the top as soon as possible. And this idea to give, when I speak also with many parents, because I was also involved in partially in creating new school system, new schools in Germany. And when I spoke with the parents who were interested in the creation of these new schools and were eventually willing to send their children in these new schools, this more or less came up always, these two things: how much time it will take to get from A to B, and what about the problem of making a living, that is to get a degree, a diploma, or something that allows you to get a job. So it's a problem. There's a connection between, on one side we had this ideal of letting time, trusting our children. On the other side, there's this enormous pressure from society and from the environment, which is fear-based, all fear-based. Will they make it? And then when they see that their children may be a little behind in reading, for example, or in other skills, they begin to make pressure on their children, because they, as parents, are under pressure. And then it's a vicious circle. So my question is, of course, how can we get out of that? This is obviously also a topic for another meeting, which would take much too long time. But this is also a question that I offer. We have nice ideals here, trusting our kids, giving them time, let the soul emerge and express itself. On the other side, we have this problem, how to make a living. But at any rate, I think these are aspects that must be revised deeply in the system, because they are system immanent, that go beyond the principles in itself.
Thank you, Marco. And probably we'll continue the next discussion in 2 weeks. We'll talk about the third principle, and we'll move from there. We'll move our discussion from there. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You all.
Thank you.
Delightful.
Yeah, I think we are all learning from this discussion. and
Our own little group here.
yeah.
Very inspiring,
All right.
yes.
All right. Have a good couple of weeks, friends.